Hi, my name's Alessia. My family calls me dramatic, emotional, even ungrateful. They told people I just didn't want to be involved when they erased me from my mother's 70th birthday, when they printed my name wrong on official invitations, when they quietly rewrote the trust that was originally mine. But what they didn't say? They used my company's jets, my systems, my contracts, while telling the world I was the failure. And when I found out what they'd done, I didn't scream. I rewrote everything. But now I wonder, what hurts more? Being left out of the story, or realizing they never meant to write you in at all? They excluded me from Mom's birthday, but I'd already started rewriting my guest list. That list started the day my name vanished from the family photo wall. It wasn't a dramatic event. No announcement. Just a quiet rearrangement of frames. One afternoon, I walked into the hallway in Charleston, where all the family milestones were hung, and there it was. My face. Gone. A photo that used to sit right between Teresa's law school graduation and Dorian's wedding had been swapped for a Carter Foundation award from a local gala. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Mom always said, "Let's not make a fuss over little things." And that's what I'd become. A little thing. Easier to remove than explain. Easier to replace than recognize. Back in Atlanta, I stood by the kitchen window, phone still in hand, rereading the message. Maybe sit this one out. Just 5 words that told me exactly where I stood in their pecking order. The air outside was thick with early summer heat, the kind that makes you sweat, even in the shade. I stared at the horizon as a jet ascended beyond the trees. Its tail disappeared behind the cloud line, but my memory didn't. They didn't know. They didn't have to know. The jet belonged to a fleet under my name, leased out through a corporate web so dense not even our family attorney could trace it. It was funny how often people assume ownership looks loud. Cars, parties, plaques on walls. But the loudest kind of power is the one that operates in silence. 6 months ago, I tried to speak up about Dorian's accounting errors, the transfers to a Cayman shell company, the fake consultants. I showed them everything: spreadsheets, timestamps, wire records. Their response? A family intervention. Not for him, for me. "You're causing unnecessary tension," Mom had said. "We've all moved past it." Teresa chimed in with her soft therapist voice. "Maybe this is your way of asking for attention." I remember every word. And the worst part? They said it in a loving tone. As if I were the unstable one. As if truth-telling was just another symptom of a daughter who couldn't let go of her need to be right. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I left. Not the room, the role. The role of the difficult one, the one they could gaslight, silence, mold. That was the night I drove back to Atlanta with the windows down and my future echoing in the silence. I poured all of it into work, the real kind, not the performative foundation nonsense they did for press photos. I restructured the company, consolidated the aviation software, pulled in new clients, bought out 2 regional charters, and folded them under my shell. They didn't notice. They were too busy planning Mom's 70th. And now, on the eve of the event, I was being told, once again, to make peace by disappearing. I won't lie, it stung. Not because I wanted a slice of cake or a seat at the table, but because after everything I did to keep the family from imploding, this was my reward. Deletion. I could have replied to the message. Something gracious, something like, "I understand." That's what Alessia, the obedient youngest child, would have done. Instead, I watched that jet, my jet, disappear behind the clouds and thought, "They're flying with wings I built. Let them. Just don't expect me to stay grounded while they do." But plans like that only work when you have no leverage. And I did. That night, I stayed in, poured a glass of that mid-shelf Pinot I usually reserve for guests, and sat by the window as Charleston faded behind the clouds of memory. It was gala night, family night, whatever they called it now, and I had officially been asked not to show. The irony? They were using a jet from my fleet, leased through a dummy holding account under a different name, of course. They'd never bothered to ask who owned what. They just assumed anything they used must belong to someone else with a last name that mattered. Mine only counted when it was convenient. My phone buzzed around 7:10 p.m. First came the photos, group shots, balloons, glasses raised in slow-motion boomerangs. Everyone looked like an ad for Southern Harmony. Teresa in that floor-length emerald gown. Dorian, of course, wore navy. The family's golden boy had always had a thing for looking respectable. And there she was, my mother, standing in the middle, wearing the pearl necklace I'd commissioned for her birthday. She didn't know I designed it. Carol, our longtime housekeeper, had helped deliver it discreetly. I'd made her promise not to say anything. At the time, it felt noble. Now, it just felt stupid. They captioned the photo, 3 generations of Carter strength. No mention of the 4th. Me. Then Teresa called. I stared at her name on the screen long enough for it to ring twice. I almost let it go to voicemail. But curiosity. It's a hell of a thing. Hey, she chirped, her voice sugary and just a touch too bright. We're about to toast to Mom. Even Dorian wrote something sweet for once. Want me to put you on speaker? I should have said no. I should have said anything. But instead, I let the line stay open. And then I heard it. To the children who have never left my side, Mom began, her voice proud, polished, rehearsed. To Teresa for being my rock. And to Dorian for showing us all the power of redemption. There was no third name, no pause, not even a breath where mine might have gone. The room burst into clapping. Silverware hit glassware. Someone shouted, "Well said!" Teresa chimed in, "And to family, who always stands together." I bit down on the inside of my cheek, hard. Teresa laughed again, as if it were all so organic, so innocent, as if I hadn't spent the last year cleaning up Dorian's messes behind the scenes and running the very infrastructure that flew Mom to her spa weekends and got her charity guests home from her events. I found my voice, but only enough to whisper, "You forgot someone." I wasn't sure if I hung up or if she did. The line just stopped. I sat there for a while after that, the wine untouched, the house quiet. And I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself until now. It wasn't about being left out of a toast. It was about being edited out, intentionally. People don't have to scream to erase you. Sometimes they just smile and toast to everyone but you. And if they do it long enough, the world forgets you were ever part of the picture. They were rewriting history, while I was still alive to witness it. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. No, something else had started growing in that space. Not rage, not grief. Clarity. Control isn't about noise. It's about knowing when to flip the switch. It had taken me years to learn that. Growing up in a family where volume equaled dominance, I used to think the loudest person always won. But silence, when used intentionally, had its own weight. And lately, I'd stopped filling up every space with explanations no one was asking for. That night, I scrolled through the latest round of party photos. More compliments under Teresa's curated captions. I wasn't angry anymore. Just observant. Detached in the kind of way that comes when you realize your name isn't just forgotten, it's been quietly replaced. I clicked open the last photo she'd posted. It was a close-up of Mom, hands folded under her chin, smiling like the world made perfect sense. She wore the necklace I'd sent her, the one I had designed, the one I hand-picked each element of, from the single pearl I found in Sanibel to the gold clasp I had custom forged. Engraved on the back was a single line, LK, worth more than you know. I didn't attach a name. I didn't want recognition. That was never the point. But the caption under the photo read, "From her favorite daughter, timeless, just like her." Favorite daughter? The comments followed fast. "Teresa, you always have such impeccable taste." "She's lucky to have you." "Of course you picked it out. It's perfect." I stared at the screen until it blurred. Then I zoomed in on the necklace, just to confirm it was the same one. Of course it was. That was the part that hurt. I had given it freely, and they'd taken it fully. My phone sat heavy in my hand as I scrolled back to the original invoice, the delivery receipt, the card that I'd left blank, by design. I wanted the gift to speak louder than my name ever could, but Teresa had spoken for me, and no one questioned it. I sat back, chewing over the same truth I kept bumping into. It was never about facts in our family. It was about who said them loudest, prettiest, most convincingly. They didn't need to erase me in public. They just had to let others assume I was never there. I opened my contacts and tapped Carol's number. She answered after 2 rings. "Evening, Miss Alessia." "Carol," I said slowly, "did anyone ask about the necklace?" She hesitated, and I could almost hear her shifting the phone from one shoulder to the other. "Well, your mother assumed it came from Miss Teresa." I didn't correct her. "Did you know it would play out like that?" "I suspected," she admitted gently, "but you never told me to say otherwise. And Teresa, she just stepped into the space you left blank." There it was. Teresa didn't steal the gift. She claimed the silence. And I let her. Not because I was weak, but because I was tired. Tired of explaining my choices to people who already had their version of the truth laminated and framed. After we hung up, I walked to my desk and pulled the original sketch of the necklace from a drawer. My initials were on the back of that sheet. The clasp design bore my exact proportions. It wasn't proof for anyone else, it was proof for me. They can pretend she picked it. But I knew the origin. I knew the story. And deep down, so did Carol. Maybe even Mom. But it didn't matter anymore. Because if I had learned anything over the past few months, it was this. Sometimes you don't fight lies with louder truths. Sometimes you build so quietly that by the time they realize you were the architect, the entire house is already under your name. They stole credit. They rewrote history. But I was rewriting ownership, and they weren't invited to the edit room. And this time, I was done pretending to swim. I turned off the living room lamp, letting the low amber glow fade as the city lights outside flickered through the blinds. The silence inside my condo wasn't cold anymore. It was intentional. I stood by the window, arms folded, watching another of my jets take off from the private strip across the river. It was the same model I'd insisted on upgrading the fleet with, a sleeker engine, better fuel economy, and a cabin system so quiet the hum barely registered over conversation. I didn't need to guess who was on board. The tail number confirmed it. Same jet Mom had used last week for her so-called girls' retreat in St. Bart's. She'd bragged about how smooth the flight was in a text to Teresa. Teresa forwarded it to the family group chat, conveniently omitting that the carrier belonged to Elite, my company. They thought they were chartering from a boutique executive firm. In reality, they were boarding aircraft operated through 3 layers of shell companies that led right back to me. I never hid the contracts. I just didn't label them in neon ink. They never asked, and I never offered. Years ago, when I first told Dad I wanted to fly, he laughed. "That's a man's field, sweetheart. Aviation's about grit, pressure, split-second judgment. You really think that's where you want to be?" I didn't answer him then, but I knew. Teresa, on the other hand, found it charming. "Honestly, Allie, you'd ruin your skin flying around in all that dry cabin air." I think she thought she was being helpful, so I stopped telling them what I was doing. I stopped asking for space to dream. Instead, I learned how to build without applause. I started small, consulting for someone else's fleet. Then I branched out. I saw the gaps in service, the frustrations high-profile clients had with consistency and privacy. I fixed what no one else was paying attention to, and I never, not once, put my name on the top line. What they didn't know is that every time they took a trip, praised the service, or complained about a missed drink request, they were logging experiences inside a system I designed. Their names were coded as VIPs. The data sat on servers I owned. The crew that smiled at them in pressed uniforms had all signed NDAs issued through my legal team. And I? I stayed behind the curtain, collecting invoices and watching them float along, clueless. I opened my laptop and pulled up the latest flight plan. Carter Foundation Retreat, Nassau, Bahamas. Round trip. Departure, Friday, 8:15 a.m. Return, Monday, 4:10 p.m. Filed through a mid-tier travel agency using a front-end booking API my company had built 6 months ago. My cursor hovered over the flag for compliance review box. I clicked. The screen blinked. A notice went out to operations. I didn't feel a surge of power, not the way movies make you think you will. I felt quiet, balanced. It wasn't vengeance. It was accountability, handed out in the language they understood best. Policy, contract, procedure. Once upon a time, I'd believed fairness could be earned with patience, that if I just worked hard enough, quietly enough, they'd eventually notice. But life doesn't reward silence. It exploits it. I checked the jet's maintenance record, confirmed the onboard Wi-Fi pinged the same cockpit modem I had installed as part of our smart route rollout. Then I marked it. Hangar 14, Charleston Executive, flagged, not canceled, not delayed, just placed under review. No confrontations, no drama, no emails that started with, "I feel." This wasn't about emotional justice. This was about positioning. Teresa once told me at brunch, after one of our rare civil moments, "You can't burn bridges. You never know when you'll need to cross them again." She was right. But what she didn't realize is, sometimes you don't need to cross a bridge, because sometimes you own the whole river. But business only stays clean when someone's watching the books. I wasn't planning to start my Monday by seeing Dorian's face. But there he was, front and center on LinkedIn, all grins and polished teeth, shaking hands with a VC guy who looked like he'd never flown commercial in his life. Carter Financial signs partnership with Montrose Equity. The headline read, "Legacy, Loyalty, Vision." I almost laughed out loud. Legacy? That man hadn't built a thing in his life. Loyalty? He was only loyal to the mirror and his own mess. Vision? If you count hiding 6 figures behind fake consulting firms as vision, then sure, he was practically clairvoyant. I stared at the photo longer than I should have. Not because I missed him, but because I remembered every sleepless night I spent fixing what he broke. When I reported the embezzlement, I thought I was saving the family from public humiliation. Instead, I became the family embarrassment. I was the troublemaker, the overreactor, the one who needed to let it go. They called it a mistake. "Creative liquidity," Mom whispered, like it was a misunderstanding, not a white-collar crime. Dad didn't even look at the numbers. I remember him leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, saying, "You sure you're not just jealous of your brother's success?" That one stung. Not because it was true, but because it told me exactly what he believed. Dorian was a builder. I was a bother. And now, my bother of a brother had taken his tarnished resume and spun it into gold. I closed the post and pulled up the internal elite logs. I wasn't doing this to snoop. I had every legal right. Carter Financial had used Elite's services for 3 previous events. I remembered because I was the one who greenlit their account. Montrose Equity was now tied to them through this new partnership. Funny thing, Montrose had used Elite for their last 3 international retreats. They loved our low-noise interiors and hyper-secure passenger manifests. My fingers hovered over their access records. Then I checked the charter logs from Nassau last year. Montrose's CEO had praised our team's discretion so hard, he even tried to poach our lead pilot. Interesting. I opened a new window and drafted an internal compliance flag. Standard language. Pending verification of financial ethics and partner compliance under Clause 14B of our corporate trust standards. It wasn't personal. It was protocol. I had no interest in airing out Dorian's old crimes. But if his name was now tied to any of my vendors, he had to clear the same bar as everyone else. That's how systems work. Once you're inside mine, you follow the rules. Rules he thought I didn't know how to write. I remembered something Dad said once, during a heated dinner, when I told him I was drafting my own contracts. Alessia, people don't care who's right. They care who's holding the pen. Well, guess what, Dad? I was holding the damn pen now, and I was writing people out. I sent one email, just one, to the legal contact at Montrose. Subject line: Urgent, Partnership Ethics Verification. Body: Please confirm Dorian Carter's compliance with your internal anti-fraud policies to continue partnership privileges under our intervendor clause. No threats, no emotion, just facts. It hit their inbox at 9:37 a.m. sharp. By 10:12, their scheduler had opened it twice. No reply yet. I didn't wait. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about alignment, making sure the people tied to my operations weren't living double lives. I'd spent enough time being quiet while other people decorated themselves with what I built. Now I was putting down boundaries. Quietly, legally, precisely. Because eventually, the truth doesn't just come out. Sometimes it knocks on the wrong door with the right signature. Instead, I started listing everything they didn't know I owned. I pulled up a document I hadn't looked at in weeks, an internal chart mapping out every corporate entity tied to Elite, directly and indirectly. There were names they'd recognize: Crescent Solutions, Pine Coast Logistics, but most were ghosts. Shells stacked like Russian dolls, signed under borrowed surnames, partners of partners. I had built a network so discreet it could function in plain sight without drawing attention. That was the point. Mom's voice still echoed in my ear. It's still your brother. What she meant was, protect the family, not the truth, never the truth. I sat with that for a long time. It was just past 11, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I didn't turn on music. I didn't need anything competing with the volume of that sentence. He's still your brother. And what was I? The enemy? The whistleblower? The disappointment? At 16, I caught Dorian funneling donation money from a school supply drive into his own private debit account. He blamed the vendor, said they miscalculated the invoices. I brought the proof, side-by-side transfers. And what did Mom say? You don't destroy someone's future over one bad decision. That line stayed with me longer than any apology. I was made to sit through an awards banquet that week. He received a community service medal. I clapped. Quietly. Like a good team player. That was the game. Lie beautifully, get rewarded. Tell the truth, get erased. This wasn't new. It was just louder now. The phone call earlier had revealed more than Mom intended. I'm not saying he was right, she'd said, but she was. Because defending Dorian's image, no matter how much of it was borrowed, was more important than recognizing who kept the foundation from cracking. My foundation. I walked over to my printer and hit print on the ownership summary. 56 pages. I watched the first few sheets slide out. The names, the timelines, the signatures. Every move documented. No drama, just ink and record. By the time the printer finished, it was midnight. I carried the stack to the kitchen table and flipped through the first 10 pages. A legal structure born of necessity. A wall built to stop their noise from bleeding into what I had to build to survive. I poured myself a glass of water and stared at the ceiling. She didn't even ask if it was true. Not once during that call did she say, "Did you send it?" Or, "Was it accurate?" Because it didn't matter to her whether Dorian had broken the rules. It only mattered that I'd made someone notice. Family doesn't do that. Doesn't do what exactly? Doesn't hold each other accountable? Doesn't ask questions? Doesn't refuse to be used? I could have called her back. I could have softened the edges, reminded her of how I once used to bring her tea when she had migraines, or how I drove Dorian home drunk from a party so he wouldn't get arrested. But I didn't. Because if I had learned anything, it was this. Silence was their currency, and I was done letting them spend me. I opened my laptop and started drafting a memo, not to my family, but to my legal team. A simple note. Begin prepping internal ownership assertion, including trustee reassessment filings. No anger, No commentary, just a shift, the kind that doesn't make noise. Until it does. Except this time, business included consequences. By Thursday afternoon, I was at the office, window open behind me, Charleston's skyline muted in the haze. The printer hummed in the corner, contract packets and legal addendums spilling out onto the tray one after another. I wasn't touching them yet. I already knew what was inside. Instead, I reached for a leather folder labeled Hanger Leases, Carter Family. I hadn't opened it in over a year, maybe longer. It was one of those files I kept tucked under tax agreements and special airspace permits. Important, but rarely needed. Until now. I flipped past the summary pages until I hit paragraph 17. Subclause 3, right where I remembered it. Elite Holdings reserves the right to revoke hangar access and related services with 24-hour notice under operational discretion or security concerns. Standard language, the kind of clause no one reads unless they're hunting for an out or looking for a way in. And my family? They didn't read it, they just signed. They never asked who drafted the lease. They never wondered why it was so specific, why the notice window was so narrow, why I'd insisted on adding that particular line to an otherwise generic agreement, because they didn't know I was the one who wrote it. They thought they were dealing with a faceless legal team, some assistant or vendor. Maybe someone young and eager to impress. They never imagined the clause was mine, that I built it, word by word, like a trapdoor under their feet. Just in case. While they poured champagne over ribbon cuttings and boasted about family-owned legacies, I was embedding contingencies, quiet little escape hatches no one noticed until someone pulled them open. And now, I was ready to test one. I leaned back in my chair, rereading the clause slowly, then picked up the phone and buzzed Sarah, my head of legal. I need you to issue a formal notice for Hangar 19, I said. Use the 24-hour clause. Activation. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. There was a beat of silence on the other end. You're sure? She asked, cautious but composed. Very. Reason? I hesitated, then answered with the truth. Operational security. She didn't ask which operation. That's what I liked about Sarah. She knew when to follow the rulebook and when to trust the hand holding the pen. I ended the call and opened my inbox, scrolled to the archived contracts, and cross-checked the routing logs for the jet parked at Hangar 19. Sure enough, it was the Carter family's flagship plane, the one Mom insisted on calling the Legacy. The irony didn't escape me. They'd be flying out Saturday morning. Nassau. Carter Foundation Leadership Retreat, sponsored by a company that had quietly trimmed my name out of every footnote. Not anymore. I checked the calendar. There were still a few hours left in the day, and I didn't want to rush this. I wasn't operating out of emotion. This was structure, clean, silent, effective. They wouldn't receive an alert tonight. No warning, no blinking system. But tomorrow, when they showed up with luggage and press folders and legacy branding, they'd find the hangar dark, the plane locked, and no staff on site. Just a small paper notice posted at the gate. Access temporarily suspended under operational review. Please contact your leasing administrator. They would call the number on the sheet. It would route to a department that only spoke in protocol and escalation chains. No apologies, no explanations. Because this wasn't revenge. This was architecture. They taught me to build walls to keep my mouth shut. So I learned to build systems instead. Systems that could speak without me. I packed up the folder, slid it back into the drawer, and turned off the printer. It was nearly 6. The city outside had started to flicker to life again. Car lights threading through traffic, sirens in the distance, the pulse of people who didn't know their weekend plans were about to change. But I knew. I reached for my keys. Because while they'd be stuck grounded, staring at a locked gate, I'd be airborne. Off to the next deal, my next project, my next move. They wouldn't even know what hit them until the jet didn't move. And by then, I'd already be gone. Because if silence was my crime, I'd weaponize it properly. The sky was already pinking when I stepped out of the car. I had driven straight from the office to my place in Midtown, bypassing traffic by cutting through the back streets I knew too well. The weight of the week was tucked into my shoulders, but I wasn't tired, just focused. My plan didn't need noise. It needed timing. And that part I'd perfected. I poured myself a glass of water, took off my shoes, and sat at the kitchen table where my laptop waited. Still open, glowing softly in the dim light. One more look at the schedule. 7:17 p.m. The Jet's check-in window began at 7:10. I opened the family group chat. Not to speak, just to read. No one had mentioned me, of course. Mom had shared a photo of the flower arrangements for the retreat departure. White roses, navy ribbons, Carter Foundation tags printed in gold. Beneath it, Teresa replied, "Elegant, just like our legacy." That word again. Legacy. It wasn't the word that got to me. It was how easily they used it, like it had no cost, like it wasn't built on someone else's back. I stared at the screen a moment longer. Then, at 7:12 exactly, I opened a blank text and typed, "I won't be at Mom's birthday, but you may want to double-check your flight plan for Monday. Send. No emojis, no follow-up, not even my name. Let them sit with it." 3 minutes passed, then 6. Then my screen lit up. Teresa. "What are you talking about? Don't start this, Alessia." I didn't respond. Instead, I tapped into the back-end control panel for Elite Airfield Systems. Selected Hangar 19. Scroll. Tap. Override authorization? Yes. I toggled the switch. Nothing flashy. No alarms. Just a quiet shift in protocol that locked the doors, disabled fueling permissions, and froze the departure manifest in place. Then came the second call. Not from them directly, but from their assistant, Caitlin. Her voice was tight but polite. "Hi, Alessia. Sorry to bother you, but there seems to be an issue with the boarding app. The jet isn't verifying credentials for tomorrow's flight. I think something's wrong with the reservation server." "Oh?" I said, sipping my water. "That's odd. Do you happen to know who we should talk to at Elite for a manual override?" "I'll look into it," I said, then hung up. I walked to the living room and sat down, curling my legs under me as the quiet took hold. This was the part they never taught. The stillness after the switch is flipped. Not vengeance, just the calm of control. I opened a second window and composed a brief message to Marcus, our operations lead at the Ground Control Center. Flight 719 Carter. Cancel takeoff clearance. Confirm full lockdown. Don't lift without executive override. I didn't need to say anything else. He knew the weight of my words. I sat back and waited. Because sometimes the most powerful thing isn't what you say, it's what you don't allow. 20 minutes later, I got the update. The pilot had attempted to log in. Credentials failed. The system responded with, "Access denied. Restricted flag triggered by internal security protocol." Their jet? Going nowhere. Their plans? Grounded. Their image of untouchable legacy? Fractured. One silent keystroke at a time. I looked at the clock. 7:41. They were probably just sitting down to dinner, wine glasses clinking, talking about their upcoming impact retreat. And I? I was at home, barefoot, in sweatpants, making power plays without ever raising my voice. They used to call me the troublemaker, but trouble doesn't look like shouting. Sometimes, trouble just looks like a quiet woman with the right passwords. If they gave me a mic, I'd use it, just not the way they expected. The next morning, my phone rang as I was stepping out of the elevator into the office. The number was familiar, Dad's cell. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something in me, curiosity, maybe spite, made me pick up. He didn't say hello. "What's going on, Alessia? Teresa says you're interfering with logistics. The jet, the retreat. What the hell are you doing?" I kept my voice flat. "I'm applying internal compliance, nothing more." He was quiet for a second, then sighed. "You know," he said, "your sister's always been the likable one. Easy to work with, no drama. You make people tense." It landed like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I'd heard versions of that for most of my life. You're too intense. Can you not take everything so seriously? It's just a joke. Those phrases were like wallpaper in our family's home, always there, part of the decor. So I said nothing. Let the silence do the talking. He didn't even ask if what Teresa said was true, just accepted her version and ran with it. I'm in meetings, I said, then hung up before he could say anything else. After lunch, I checked my inbox and found a message from Paige, a friend from college who still volunteered with the Carter Foundation. Just wanted to say hi, and wow, love that you're on the gala list. Didn't know you were speaking. So cool. I blinked. I wasn't on any list. She forwarded the digital invite. I clicked the link. There it was. Carter Foundation Annual Gala. Featured guests: Teresa Calvin, Dorian Molesky, Loretta Calvin, and Alyssa McKinnon. I stared at the name. It wasn't a typo. It wasn't even close enough to be accidental. It was a version of me that didn't exist. And she, this fictional shadow of me, was seated at a table labeled Extended Sponsors and Staff. A polite way of saying, not family. No mention of my role. No reference to the jet fleet that carried their events. No context. They didn't even bother to ask if I was coming, I muttered aloud. They just wrote me in like a footnote, a detail they had to acknowledge legally, so they turned me into a shadow to soften the edges. I scrolled down and saw the RSVP button. There were options to confirm attendance, select a meal, and, at the bottom, a checkbox. Interested in delivering brief remarks, subject to approval. I checked it. A minute later, an auto response came back. Thank you, Alyssa. Your request to speak has been approved. Topic: Legacy. I closed the tab. They wanted me muted, misnamed, parked at the edge of their curated narrative. Instead, I was walking in with my real name and their real story. Not the version they rehearsed for the press. Not the version with ribbon cuttings and foundation slogans. The one with spreadsheets, with shell companies, with the daughter who built the runway under their feet. I booked my flight to Charleston for the gala weekend. Not on their jet, on mine. And I wasn't finished speaking. Not yet. The room was hushed, an unnatural quiet for a Carter event. For a family that prided itself on appearances and practiced applause like it was part of the bloodline, the silence felt like a power shift. I could feel Teresa watching me from her seat. Her hands probably still warm from the standing ovation she received just minutes earlier. The applause that wasn't meant for her. Not really. But I let that slide. Because the real show was about to begin. I took a slow breath and let my voice carry. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. Legacy is a word we like to toss around, I said. We print it on brochures, hang it behind podiums, weave it into mission statements. But here's the thing. Legacy isn't just a name. It's who built the foundation you're standing on. Someone shifted in their seat. I didn't look. Aviation partnerships, I continued. That phrase gets thrown around too. Teresa mentioned her work with regional logistics in a recent interview, called it a family project. But I'd like to clarify a few things. A few people straightened up. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single folder. Thick, stapled, time-stamped. This is the original incorporation contract for Elite Airfield Systems, dated 3 years ago. My name appears on every line. Registration, vendor sourcing, capital structuring. I negotiated the first private jet lease before anyone else in this room even knew the company existed. My voice didn't shake. Teresa did not design the system. She didn't build the logistics software, didn't sign the contracts, didn't manage the security team that screens every passenger on every elite flight. That was me. Still no reaction from the front table. Just polished smiles starting to slip. I closed the folder gently, letting the sound echo just enough. I've stayed quiet out of respect. For the family, for the image, for the illusion that we've all been rowing in the same direction. But when you build the boat and someone else tries to steer it into photo ops, you eventually have to grab the oar back. I looked at Mom. She didn't blink. I looked at Dad. He adjusted his cufflink, a habit of his when he's uncomfortable. I looked at Dorian. He was sipping water, slow, calculated. And then I looked at Teresa. She gave me a smile, brittle at the edges. The kind that says, "Let's talk about this later," in front of 100 people. Too late. Before I step off this stage, I'll say this, I added, my voice softening. If you want to celebrate legacy, start by acknowledging who actually laid the bricks. Applause didn't come immediately. Just a few hesitant claps from the back. One from someone near the bar. It grew from there, awkward and reluctant, like the crowd was trying to decide if it was safe to agree with me yet. I stepped down slowly, walked past the tables, past the marketing director from the family firm who used to pretend not to remember my name, past Aunt Evelyn, who once said at Thanksgiving, "Alessia's more of a background type, don't you think?" I walked right past the family table, and as I passed Teresa, I heard her whisper, "You made your point." I didn't stop, but I did answer. "No," I said without turning. "I just started telling the story right." But doing better meant being ready for retaliation. By the time I got back to my hotel suite, the buzz of the gala had already started bleeding into local press. Someone had live-streamed part of my speech. A trimmed-down clip was already circulating. Me at the podium, saying, "If you want to celebrate legacy, start by acknowledging who actually laid the bricks." That line was now the headline on a small Charleston news site. Comments ranged from, "Finally someone said it," to, "Why bring drama to a fundraiser?" I knew how these things worked. The truth always came wrapped in controversy, especially when it was delivered by the person everyone had agreed should be quiet. I showered, answered a few emails, declined a calendar invite from a foundation subcommittee meeting I had never agreed to attend in the first place. Around midnight, I was just about to turn off the lights when my phone lit up. Dorian. Of course. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Look," he started, tone already defensive. "I get it. You were hurt. You did what you had to do, and honestly, you were right about the Montrose thing. I messed up." I didn't say anything. "But we can fix this," he added quickly. "Just need a little help. Not even long-term. Short-term access to the trust account, just to show investors everything's still in order." There it was. Not regret. A request. Not an apology. A transaction. He wasn't sorry. He was strategic. Always had been. When we were kids, he once told me, "If you admit to being wrong fast enough, people stop asking questions." He'd lived by that rule. Made it an art. Like the time he crashed Mom's Lexus into the neighbor's fence, blamed it on a stray dog, and somehow convinced everyone I had distracted him. I spent 2 weekends grounded while he played basketball, and got congratulated for staying calm under pressure. Nothing had changed. "You didn't call to apologize," I said. "You called to negotiate." Silence on the line. "I just need to show that I still have access." "And you don't," I cut in, "because you breached the agreement. Multiple times." That was years ago. And yet, here you are. Same behavior, different watch. "You really want to air all this in front of investors?" he snapped, dropping the performance. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Funny," I replied. "You weren't worried about public image when you were funneling fake invoices through shell vendors." He hung up. No drama, no slam. Just a quiet click. I set my phone down and turned back to my laptop, logged into the Family Trust Management portal. Located Dorian's access permissions. Clicked Revoke. Reason for removal. Repeated breach of fiduciary responsibility. A message popped up. "Are you sure you want to proceed?" I clicked yes. For years, I'd been told to stay in line, to play my part, to let the men handle the numbers while the women handled the image. But now I was handling both. They wanted me to act like I was part of the family business, so I did, just better, and I still hadn't played my final card. At 8:03 a.m. sharp, my phone lit up. The name on the screen was Jill, Elite's head of operations. She only called when it mattered. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the shift beneath it. Ms. McKinnon, we've received confirmation from ground crew. The Carter jet is locked. Hangar access revoked. Pilots requesting override. I glanced at the time on my laptop, still open from earlier. They're asking if this is an error. It's not, I said, standing from my chair and moving toward the window. It's business. There was a pause. Then Jill simply said, "Understood," and hung up. I let the phone fall into my palm and stared out at the tarmac in the distance. Tiny planes like silver insects taxiing slowly under the morning light. From my view, the world looked organized, predictable, like rules had meaning again. One tap. That's all it took. One tap in a system I had designed from scratch. All access marked, temporarily restricted. Crew scheduling, frozen. Fuel authorization, revoked. Onboard Wi-Fi, disconnected. Passenger manifest, sealed. The note on their charter file read, "Pending compliance with internal audit and verified chain of command." That clause had been there from the beginning. No one reads the fine print. Not when they think they're family. Not when they believe their last name is the only clearance they need. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made a scene. No angry emails. No emotional fallout. Just a keystroke. Just the same tool they handed me when they tried to ignore I existed. I leaned over the counter in my office kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and whispered to myself, "Always read the fine print." That phrase used to be a joke in our family. Dad would say it whenever a bill came in with hidden fees or Mom's magazine subscription auto-renewed without warning. But it stopped being a joke when I realized I was the fine print, the part they skimmed past until they needed something. Then suddenly, I was expected to be available, agreeable, invisible. Not anymore. This used to feel like betrayal. Now it felt like liberation. I wasn't punishing them. I was simply no longer paying the price for their comfort. If they wanted the power of my resources, they had to follow my structure. No more shortcuts. No more smiling through slights. No more pretending everything's fine, just because we share blood. If they wanted to fly again, they'd have to ask. And if they didn't, well, then they'd sit grounded. Same way they made me sit for years, while they passed around credit that belonged elsewhere. My assistant, Rachel, messaged me 10 minutes later. "Teresa just attempted to charter through a third-party broker in Singapore. Different email, same passenger manifest. We flagged it. Access denied." I smiled. Because it wasn't just the Carter Teat GD we're locked out of. It was the entire structure. Every thread they used to pull with a wink and a phone call, cut. I had rebuilt everything they once claimed. They said I made things complicated. They called me difficult, emotional, unlikable. But the truth is, they just didn't like not being in control. They weren't used to playing by rules they didn't write. And now they were outside the system, looking in, including the page they tried to erase. The file came through on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I was in my office, halfway through my second cup of coffee, when Carol's text buzzed across my screen. "Found this on an old camera before I wipe it. Thought you should see." Attached was a short video. No context, no file name, just a timestamp, April 18th, 2006. I opened it out of habit. What I wasn't prepared for was the sound, soft laughter, clinking glasses, and someone singing off-key in the background. The camera panned shakily across a garden party. Paper lanterns, folding chairs, plastic forks. Probably Mom's 60th. I recognized the tablecloths, cream with navy trim. She used only once before declaring they clashed with her aesthetic. Then the camera settled on me. 16. Awkward braces. Holding a folded sheet of paper. I was standing near the edge of the pool, hesitating. "Mom," I said softly, "can I? Just a few words?" She was smiling in another direction, glass of white wine in hand, laughing at something Aunt Evelyn had said. "Alessia, not now." "Please, it's just a short thank you." And then came the part that hit harder than I expected. If you can't be quiet, don't expect to be around long. My breath caught watching it. I knew the words were real. I remembered how they made me feel. But hearing them again, outside the haze of memory, felt different. The camera swung away as if nothing had happened. I saw myself lower the paper. I didn't cry. I just disappeared into the background, silently, obediently. 2 minutes later, they sang Happy Birthday and cut the cake. No one noticed. I watched the entire clip again, then again. And something in me cracked, not from pain, but from confirmation. It wasn't a one-off moment. It was a lesson. That day, I learned the cost of voice. I learned that silence was currency in our family, and if I wanted to stay, I had to keep the volume down. For years, I thought I was being dramatic for holding on to it. Now, I realized, I had simply been trained to vanish politely. I never finished that speech. I couldn't even remember what it was supposed to say, but I do remember the feeling. That sinking sense that nothing I said would ever matter, unless it made someone else look better. And that moment, 16 years old, rejected in front of a crowd that barely registered it, wasn't isolated. It was foundational. They didn't silence me. They taught me how to silence myself. Until now. I downloaded the clip, renamed it The Blueprint, and moved it to my encrypted archive. Then I uploaded it into the Trust's legal folder. Quietly, without commentary. Not to weaponize it, but to remind myself what I overcame. If they ever tried to drag me back into the shadows again, into some courtroom or public smear campaign, I wanted the record to reflect exactly where this pattern started. I closed my laptop and leaned back, letting the weight of it settle in my chest. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry. What I felt was clarity, the kind you only get when you stop trying to rewrite the past and start preserving it instead, especially not the final chapter of my own legacy. I was at my desk the next morning, sipping lukewarm coffee and scanning a vendor contract when the envelope arrived. It wasn't dropped off by courier. No digital ping or certified mail alert. Just a plain manila envelope, no return address, no handwriting on the front. It was sitting on the security desk downstairs. The receptionist handed it to me like it was nothing, but I knew. The weight of it said otherwise. I took it upstairs, peeled back the flap, and found 2 documents inside. A copy of my grandfather's will, and stapled to it, a trust amendment dated 6 years ago. I read the first page, then again slower, tracing each line like it might suddenly change. The original document named me, Alessia McKinnon, as the majority heir to the Carter family's holding company. The amendment removed me, replaced me with Dorian and Teresa. No rationale, no conversation, just a signature at the bottom. My mother's. I sat very still, staring at it, not blinking. I remembered the day she had me sign routine updates. I was 30, fresh out of my MBA program. I'd just passed my private pilot exam. I was full of optimism and corporate etiquette. She came to my condo with a leather folder and a glass of white wine. "This will simplify things," she said, as I flipped through the pages. "Just some legal streamlining, nothing to worry about." I didn't question her. Why would I? Back then, I still thought trust was something you earned once and got to keep. But trust, I've learned, is a document, not a feeling. They didn't take me out in rage or scandal. They didn't strip me publicly. They just edited me out. Silently, efficiently, and they did it knowing I wouldn't fight it, because I still believed being good was the same as being protected. I picked up the original will and scanned it into my encrypted drive. Then I did the same with the amendment. Both files were saved under a new folder. Restoration. Not retribution, just clarity. Next, I sent a message to my estate attorney. "Prepare a full shareholder audit. I want every change tracked. Signatures, timestamps, who knew what and when." She replied within minutes. "Understood. Initiating review." No drama, no confrontation. They'd written me out without a word, so I would let the paper speak now. Paper doesn't forget. And this time, neither would I. I wasn't going to burn the family empire. I didn't need to. I already owned its foundation. The audit wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. If they wanted to keep building stories, they'd need to answer for the chapters they rewrote without me. I closed the legal portal, pushed my chair back, and stood by the window. They thought I was too emotional, too stubborn, too difficult. But what they underestimated most was my memory. And the law. They'd made me sign away my birthright. But I'd signed something, too, years ago, when I chose to stop asking for approval. Now I was taking it back, line by line, clause by clause. They'd buried the truth beneath layers of signatures and polished language. But I wasn't just reading between the lines. I was rewriting them. Now it was just me, and the silence I'd finally made mine. I woke up that morning before the alarm. The air was still, the kind of early quiet that felt earned. I slipped out of bed, brewed coffee, and sat by the window overlooking the city, steel and glass, humming with purpose, none of it waiting for permission. At 7:05, I logged into the Elite Systems backend. 3 names: Teresa Calvin, Dorian Molesky, Loretta Calvin. I hovered the cursor over each and clicked Revoke Access. One by one, like removing keys from a ring I never agreed to carry. Under Reason for Action, I typed internal conflict, breach of ethics, financial obfuscation. Simple, impersonal, corporate. The way they liked it. No emails, no announcement, no confrontation, just clean execution. The kind they once praised me for in business settings. Efficient, unemotional, reliable. This time, it was used on them. By 7:45, the first call came in. Teresa. I didn't answer. A second call. Voicemail. What are you doing, Alessia? This is family. You've made your point. Call me back. Then Dorian texted. Unlock the damn jet. You got your speech. Don't push it. Even Mom tried. Just a missed call. No voicemail. As usual, she couldn't bring herself to speak when it mattered. I didn't respond, because this wasn't about a single plane or one retreat. This was about the system they'd spent decades exploiting, and the woman they underestimated long enough to think she'd never touch the switches. They thought I'd lash out, break down, call for a family meeting, offer one last speech about fairness. Instead, I sent one email. Subject: Carter Family System Access Update. Recipients: Family Group Thread. All Carter access to Elite Systems remains restricted pending legal audit. Any attempt to circumvent system restrictions will result in automatic federal reporting via Compliance Protocol 8B. For questions, please consult legal representation. I pressed send. Then I archived the thread, blocked the thread, turned off notifications. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and walked out of the apartment. By the time I got to the elevator, the sun had fully broken through the skyline. Light spilled across the metal doors, warm and unapologetic. I took a deep breath. Their empire was still standing, but it stood on frozen ground now. And I wasn't the outsider anymore. The inconvenient daughter. The one too sensitive to be in the room. I was in the room, at the head of the table, with the passwords, the contracts, the legal trail that built the walls they never thought I'd enter. And they were locked out, watching from a distance as the machine they took credit for started closing its doors, without a sound, without a fight. Just policy and power. And a woman they tried to reduce to a footnote. The difference was, this time, the systems they once used to keep me quiet were the very ones telling them, access denied. Now it was just me. And the silence I'd finally made mine. For the first time in years, I woke without dread clawing at my chest. No barrage of notifications, no buzzing calendar reminders, or vague meeting invites laced with unspoken expectations. The apartment was quiet, sun just beginning to rise behind sheer curtains, casting long, pale stripes across the floor. My breath was steady. I could hear it, really hear it. Inhale, exhale, simple, human. The morning came without fanfare. No alarms, no pings, no urgent subject lines screaming urgent in bold red. I moved slowly but deliberately, dressed in quiet layers, packed only what I needed. No extra chargers for other people's devices, no presentation backups. Just my laptop, a leather notebook, a pen I liked, and the weightless sense that maybe I was finally, actually free. By the time I reached the airport, the city was shaking itself awake. Taxis honked more out of rhythm than necessity. Pedestrians wrapped in trench coats and headphones moved like small currents, feeding into the larger tide of motion. But I wasn't headed to the usual terminal. Not Gate 47 with its burnt coffee smell and fluorescent buzz. This time, I was going through the executive wing, silent elevators, polished corridors, frosted glass. I took a seat in the lounge, warm cup of ginger tea in hand, and looked out across the tarmac. There it was. Hangar 14. Their jet. Motionless. Unattended. A $65 million monument to stillness. Polished to a high mirror shine, its nose pointed at nothing in particular. Fueled, maintained, and absolutely going nowhere. It sat like a paused idea. Once urgent, now irrelevant. It reminded me of how I used to feel. Ready. Capable. Waiting for someone else to clear me for takeoff. To grant me permission to be powerful. I had all the tools, the discipline, the drive. But I stayed grounded, because their version of leadership only had room for one pilot at a time, and I wasn't ever supposed to be that pilot. But now I wasn't on the tarmac, I was in the air. Rachel approached, tablet in hand, steps as confident and composed as ever. All set for Singapore, she said. Board meeting confirmed. Logistics group will dial in post-session. I nodded, eyes still on the hangar. Thank you. She hesitated. A flicker of something unspoken passed across her face. Teresa tried again this morning. Different login. New shell account. I barely blinked. And? Blocked within seconds. Of course it was. They were still trying to rewrite the story, still clinging to a version of events where I was the problem, and they were the architects of order. Still looking for back doors into a system they thought they owned. But I'd rebuilt the system. Without them. With walls and windows where I chose them to be. I didn't flinch. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even angry. Because this wasn't about punishing them anymore. That chapter closed months ago, maybe years ago, and I just hadn't realized it until now. This had become about release, about stepping out of a structure that only worked if I kept my head down and played small, about claiming a life that didn't require me to shrink in order to fit. I stood by the window longer, watching the world move. Service crews rolled catering carts across the tarmac. Other jets taxied with purpose, their engines low and steady. People came and went. Transactions happened, routes initiated, lives expanded. And this time, so was mine. I used to believe peace came through reconciliation, that if I waited long enough, if I kept proving my value without causing disruption, they'd eventually notice. That someday we'd be around a long table, joking over drinks about misunderstandings and timing, like characters in a well-edited holiday movie. I held on to that idea like a keepsake. But peace, real peace, doesn't come from being understood. It comes from not needing to be. I considered writing one last message. Not to accuse, not to ignite, just to speak plainly. I loved you all, I just couldn't keep loving you quietly. I typed it, read it, then archived it alongside other things I'd kept. Not to use, but to remember. The blueprint video that changed everything, the original will, the audit logs, a soft record of truth, not vengeance. Because part of healing is keeping the receipts, not for revenge, but for remembrance. For the next time someone tries to make you doubt your memory. For the times you almost convince yourself it wasn't that bad. For your own clarity. Rachel returned with coffee. Jets prepped. Crews finalizing the route. We're good to go. I took the cup and smiled. Let's fly. She smiled back. The air's clear. We walked through the corridor together, past private lounges and doors that had once required a last name I didn't have, or a favor I refused to call in. Past plaques bearing names of legacy donors I used to serve behind the scenes, making sure their seating was correct and their requests discreetly met while someone else collected the credit. At the base of the stairs, I paused. The jet gleamed. My name was on the manifest, not as a guest, not as staff, as the principal. I turned and looked back across the tarmac. Hangar 14 was still there, unmoving, unmanned, just steel and stillness, a monument to inertia. I inhaled, held it, released. Some lessons never take off, but I did.